going to show you how to make Kreative Kiwi's Crazy Patch evening bag, and I'm going to do this slightly differently today because one side of it I'm going to be using the 8x10 file and stitching it in a single hooping. So for that I've got my 8x12 embroidery frame. The other side I'm going to make using my 5x7 hoop, and that's going to be done in 2 hoopings and joined in the hoop. So I've got my 5x7 hoop there. I've also got wash away stabilizer, my threads, some cord for the shoulder strap, masking tape, and my fabrics and batting cut to size. Below in the video description there's lots of information for you and links to my supplies, where I get them, etc. There's also a link to Kreative Kiwi's Facebook group, and if you want to join that, please do go ahead. Everybody is welcome. Don't forget to answer the joining questions though, otherwise your application will be rejected. Also below is a discount code. It's valid until the 8th of February next year. That will give you 5% off of Sim thread. That's the thread that I use for my stitch outs. I like it, it's reliable, and also they've got a lovely range of colours too. You can use the code as often as you like, so that's a real added bonus. Let's get on with things. I'm going to show you how to make the freestanding lace rose, and for that I'm going to be using my 5x7 hoop, 2 layers of wash away stabilizer, and you want the fabric kind, not the plastic kind for this. I've got a matching bobbin and thread, and my bobbin has been wound from my top thread, and I've got some pins. You're going to start off by hooping your 2 layers of wash away stabilizer. And it really is important to have 2 layers for freestanding lace, because that's what's going to keep everything together while you stitch it. And we're going to pin all the way around the top edge of the hoop here. This is really important because it keeps your stabilizer from being pulled down through the hoop frame. And for freestanding lace you really need it kept taut, because if you don't, the stitches won't link and it will all come apart afterwards. So we're going to start off by putting some pins around the top of the hoop. So I take my pin, I lay it on top of the hoop frame, push it through, bring it back round and back through the stabilizer, and that will anchor the stabilizer in place. Now I always put a few extras in for freestanding lace, so rather than putting one on each side on my 5x7 hoop like I normally do, for freestanding lace I put 2 on the long sides. You can use any pins, it doesn't matter, as long as they've got a head on them. That's all you need. Now that's nice and firm and in place. Load the file into your machine along with your matching bobbin and thread, and then you're going to stitch round number 1, and that's going to complete all the lace. So that's all the stitching done. We're now going to free this from the hoop. Now you can either remove it and then cut around it, or you can do it the way I do it. It's entirely up to you. And we're now going to dissolve the wash away stabiliser. I've put a towel down and I've got a bowl of warm water here, and I'm just going to drop my rose into the water. I'm going to let the stabiliser dissolve. I'm not going to wash it all out completely because I want it to remain a little bit stiff. So once it's dissolved, I'm going to take that away. And I'm just going to lay it out flat for a minute. Just so that I can remove some of the excess water. So I've got another towel here. I'm just going to press it dry a little bit. That's fine. Okay, we're now going to create the rose. And just move that out of the way. Okay, let's get a little bit of order here. You're going to start with what I call the skinny end, and you're going to roll it round and round and round, and try and keep the centre tight. Now it's going to feel quite sticky because it's still got the wash away stabiliser in it, and that's what's going to give you your it's going to hold it in position. You see it taking on the shape of a rose now. I'm going to start slackening off a little bit so that it's not as tight. That way I can position the petals afterwards. If you don't get it right the first time, try again. And this piece here, you want to wrap that round. And then I'm going to pin it, and you can put a couple of pins in if you want to, as many as it takes to hold it in shape. And then you can play around a little bit with the petals to get them how you want them, and then you're going to let it dry, and once it dries it's going to go really stiff, and then you'll be able to use it on your bag or whatever else you want to use it on. I'm just putting a couple of pins in just to stop it from unravelling. I think I'm happy with that. So now I'm going to let that dry overnight, and that will give me my rose. Start off by hooping your cutaway stabiliser. And I like to pin around the top edge of my hoop so that it stops my stabiliser from being pulled down during stitching through the two hoop parts. So I take my pin, lay it on top of the hoop, push it through the stabiliser and then bring it back through. And I do that on all four sides. Pop your hoop into your machine and then you're going to stitch round number 1 of file A, which is the left hand side of the bag, and that's going to give you your placement outline for your batting. Place your batting over the outline and then tape it in place. Pop your hoop back into your machine and stitch round number 2 to secure it, and that will also stitch in your placement lines for your fabrics. Trim away the excess batting from around the stitch line. Place your first fabric over this area here, and you want to make sure that you've got at least ½ inch seam allowance around the edge. You're going to be placing the next fabric straight away before you stitch, so I'm going to fold this down and crease along the stitch line, and that's going to show me where I need to put the other fabric. So there's my crease. I'm now going to place this fabric face down on top of this one, and this raw edge here, or should I say this raw edge here, is going to overlap this crease line here. Check when you've got your fabric positioned that when you flip it up, that it's going to cover not only this area but also ½ inch around the edge. So when you're happy with the placement, use a little bit of tape just to hold it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 3. I'm now going to just trim up some of the excess on this side. And you're going to flip your fabric up, and because it's a little bit long, my fabric, I'm just going to put some tape at the sides rather than at the top. Actually, I'm going to trim that a little bit because otherwise it's going to get in the way. And I can now put a piece of tape at the top as well. We're now going to stitch round number 4, and that's going to stitch down the rest of the fabric edges. I'm going to trim up some of the excess fabric along here, just to reduce the bulk a little bit. We're now going to position your third fabric. Now I've got a right way up with mine, so I'm going to lay it with the right side facing upwards over the stitch line here. Then I'm going to bring it forwards and I'm going to crease the fabric on the stitch line that I'm going to be covering, like so. Then I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to line up the crease that I've just made with this stitch line here, like so. I'm now going to tape that in position. And now I know that once that's stitched and this is flipped down, that it's going to be up the right way. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 5 to secure it. I'm now going to just trim off some of the excess fabric there, just to reduce the bulk a little bit. So fold your fabric back and then you're going to tape it in place. I'm going to trim off a little bit here because it's a little bit long. It's better. And I'm going to put a little bit of tape here and here just to stop my foot getting caught underneath where the fabrics meet. You can now pop your hoop back into your machine and stitch round number 6, and that's going to secure the rest of this fabric. Round number 7 is the quilting in this area here, so if you want to change your thread colour, now is the time to do so. Colour number 8 is going to stitch the quilting in this area here. So if you want to change your thread colour, do so now. Round number 9 is going to quilt this area here. So if you want to change your thread colour, now is the time to do so. Round number 10 is going to do the decorative stitching across the top of the join here. So if you want to change your thread, now is the time to do so. And the last round of stitching on this panel is number 11, and that's going to do the decorative top stitching across this join here. Remove all your tape and pins, and then you're going to free your work from the hoop. I'm going to turn my work over. We need to leave half an inch of seam allowance all the way around here. So I've got a piece of card cut to size, and I'm just going to lay it on the stitch line and then draw a line. And I'm going to do that all the way around the edge. So do the line, follow the stitch line, I don't have to worry about this edge here because that's going to be our join, and we're going to be trimming that up in a minute very close to the stitch line. So we can now cut this out. Now going to cut along here as close to the stitch line as we can possibly get without cutting it. That's the first half completed. Load file B into your machine, and then you're going to hoop and pin your cutaway stabilizer. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 1, and that's going to give you your placement outline for your batting. Place your batting over the outline and tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 2, and that's going to secure your batting and give you your fabric placement lines. Trim away the excess batting. You're going to be placing your fabrics down in the following order. You're going to have fabric number 1 there, number 2 is the bottom here, and number 3 is the top here. So that's the order that we're going to put them down in. So take fabric number 1 and place it over this area here. And I'm just going to secure it in place with a little bit of tape. Now where you've got this line here, you're going to fold that back and make a crease along, let me get that up the right way so that you can see it, along this line. And place that back down, and that gives you your positioning for your second piece of fabric. So you need to make sure that you leave at least ½ an inch of fabric all the way around the edge. So when you put your fabrics down, so that one's going to go here, I need to make sure that all around here that there's fabric. I'm not worried about this edge here because that's going to be cut away, because that's going to be our join, but certainly around this edge here. Okay, so I'm going to fold this one back and I'm going to crease it along the same stitch line as I creased the other one, like so, and then I'm going to flip that over, sorry, not fold it back, flip it over, and make sure that I place that crease on on top of the crease line that I made in the first fabric. That way when that's stitched, that's going to flip back, and I know that it's going to give me my seam allowance around the edge as well as be in the right position. So I'm now going to tape that in place. Now pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 3 to secure the 2 pieces of fabric. So check that your fabric is okay and everything is in the right position. If you're happy that it is, you can then trim off the excess fabric along here. Pull your second fabric back over the batting, over here, and tape it in place. And I'm going to put a little bit of tape where the 2 fabrics overlap. Just move that back out of the way of the stitch line. You can now pop that into your machine and stitch round number 4, and that's going to secure the rest of these 2 fabrics. You're now going to add your third fabric, and you want to place it face down with this raw edge this side of that stitch line there, and of course making sure that you've got enough excess around the edge for your seam allowance, and then tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 5 to secure it. Check that your fabric is seated properly and that you've got your seam allowance. Then you can trim away the excess fabric from along here. Turn that round there. And my fabric's a little bit long here, so I'm just going to trim that back while I'm at it. Okay. Tape your fabric in place so that it's up the right way and nice and flat, and put a little bit of tape over where your fabrics overlap to. You can now pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 6, and that's going to secure the rest of your fabric number 3. Round number 7 is going to quilt the top area here. So if you want to change your thread colour, now is the time to do it. Round number 8 is going to quilt this area here. So again, if you want to change your thread colour, now is the time to do it. Next is the fan stitching across this area here. So if you want to change your thread colour, do so now. We've now come to the top stitching over the joins. The next area to be stitched is the top stitching along this join here. So if you want to change your thread colour, now is the time to do it. And then you're going to stitch round number 10. Is the centre of the flowers, so if you want to do them in a different colour, change your thread now, and then you're going to stitch round number 11. You're now going to stitch round number 12, and that's going to do the pretty top stitching along this seam here. We're now going to prepare this edge ready to add the other panel to it. So we're going to remove the excess fabric from along the stitch line. You're now going to join your first panel, and we want to make sure that this stitch line here sits right on top of this stitch line here, and we're going to pin it in place. And we need to make sure that we line up the outer stitch lines as well, so that it all joins properly. So when you've got it lined up, you're then going to pin it in place. Now make sure that you keep your pins right out of the way of the stitch line. So that's the first pin in. I'll turn this round. And then I want to make sure that this top stitch line here matches up with the top stitch line there. Now the panels do tend to relax once you take them out of the hoop, so you might have to sort of pull on it a little bit to make it line up. Now make sure that this piece here hasn't come over where you've stretched it a little bit, so pull that back so that the stitch lines do actually sit on top of each other, and then pin it in place. Now my pins are hard up against my hoop here because the stitch line is going to come along here to join the two pieces. You can now pop that back into your machine and stitch round number 13. First off, it's going to zigzag down here, and then if you're happy with the join, then you can stitch round number 14, which is actually going to do the top stitching over the top. Remove your hoop to check your join. You shouldn't have any fabric this side of the stitch line. If you have, when the top stitching is done, your fabric's going to show, the raw edge is going to show. So if you do have any fabric, the easiest thing to do is to get a stitch unpicker, run it underneath your zigzag stitching, and it comes apart really quickly and really easily, which is why the zigzagging has been used for the drawing. And then reposition and restitch colour number 13. My join's okay, so I'm now going to pop this back into my machine, and I'm going to stitch round number 14, and that's going to do the last line of top stitching along the join. So that's our bag panel complete. So we can now remove the tape, pins, and you can remove your work from the hoop. And as we did for here, we're now going to draw around the edge to give us our half-inch seam allowance. And I'm going to just trim this bit off here as well. So let's cut this bit here. So once more, take your trusty piece of cardboard, lay it up to the seam and draw your line. And we can now trim away the excess. That's our first part of the bag completed. We're now going to make the flap, and for that I've got my 4x4 hoop, and I've got the appropriate file loaded into my machine, and I'm still using matching bobbin and thread that I've been using throughout. So hoop and pin your stabilizer as before, then you're going to pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 1, and that's going to give you your placement outline. Place your batting over the outline and tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 2. Trim away the excess batting. We're now going to add your fabrics. So place your fabric over the bottom outline here, and then you're going to fold it back along the stitch line here and put a crease in it with your nail. That's going to give you the position where you want to put your second fabric. So this time you're going to place it face down. I'll take my little notes off of it. So face down, and you want your fabric, it's going to flip over there, so place it with the raw edge over this line here to that side of it, so that when it's stitched that will fall back like so. When you're happy with the position of it, tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 3, and that's going to stitch a line here to secure the 2 fabrics to the hoop. Okay, so now that that's stitched, we're going to trim off any bulk from this side of the stitch line and turn that round. and just trim along. We're now going to flip this back and tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 4 to secure it. Next is round number 5, and that's going to do the quilting lines across this top fabric. So if you want to change your thread, now is the time to do so. We're now going to stitch the quilting over the bottom fabric here. That's round number 6, so if you want to change your thread, now is the time to do so. We're now going to stitch the fan stitching along the join here. If you want to change your thread colour, now is the time to do so. I've changed mine to gold. And then you're going to stitch round number 7. If you're going to add a tassel, or like me, you're going to use a loop closer, then you're going to lay this down with the loop or the tassel facing upwards over the stitch line here, and then you're going to tape it in place. You're then going to place your backing fabric over the outline, and you're going to place it face down, so right sides together with your already stitched fabric, and then tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 8 to secure it. I've removed all the tape and the pins from my hoop. You can now free your work from the hoop. And we're now going to trim up, leaving at least 1/4 of an inch of seam allowance all the way around. We're now going to clip towards the stitch line all the way around, so that when we turn it out the right way, it sits neatly along the seam. Do make sure that you don't cut your stitching. Now I'm going to turn this out the right way. I like to roll my edges so that they all sit nice and neatly. Now I'm going to press that, and that's ready to attach when the time comes. So I've got my 8 by 12 frame here, and I've got the 8 by 10 single hooping crazy patch file loaded into my machine. I've hooped and pinned my cutaway stabilizer. Once you've got to that point, you're going to pop your hoop into your machine and you're going to stitch round number 1, and that's going to give you your placement outline for your batting. Place your batting over the outline and tape it in place. Pop your hoop back into your machine and stitch round number 2, and that's going to secure your batting, and it's also going to give you your placement lines for your fabrics. I'm so sorry if you can hear snoring in the background. It's my cat. He's sound asleep not far from me. Okay, you're now going to trim up the excess batting from around the stitch line. And that gives you your 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you know not to cut your fabrics back beyond this line. I've marked on here the order that we're going to add the fabric. So we're going to start off with number 1 there, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. Place your first fabric down over area 1 here. And then you're going to fold this back so that you've got a crease along this stitch line here. I'm going to crease it with my nail, and that is going to give us our placement for our second fabric. So I want this fabric to go over this line with the raw edge this side of the crease, like so. And I can now take that in place. You can now pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 3 to secure them. Trim away this excess fabric to remove the majority of the bulk. I'm going to turn this around to do this. I'm going to leave about 1/4 inch. Flip your fabric back and tape it in place. We're now going to stitch round number 4, and that's going to secure the rest of these 2 fabrics down. You're now going to place your third fabric so that the raw edge sits this side of this stitch line here. Place it face down over the line. Check that it's going to cover your outer line once it's stitched in place. And then you're going to add a little bit of tape just to hold it during stitching. Pop it in your machine and stitch round number 5. I'm going to trim these fabrics up here, just leaving about 1/4 inch allowance. And flip your fabric back and tape it in place so that it can't move during stitching. And I'm going to put a little bit of tape where the fabrics overlap, because your foot can actually get caught in those, and there's nothing more annoying. So pop your hoop back into your machine and stitch round number 6, and that's going to secure this fabric down. We're now going to trim off all the excess fabric right up to the stitch line here. I'm going to turn this round. Half of my hoop might go out of the shot, I'm afraid, but it's too large. Okay, so trim away. You're now going to place your 4th fabric for here over the outline, and it's going to stitch along this line here, so make sure that your raw edge is that side of this stitch line, and of course that it overlaps your outer line there as well. And then, as before, tape it in place. Fold your fabric back so that you know, and crease it so that you know where your line is. And then you're going to place fabric number 5 face down over the line here, so that when it's stitched it's going to flip back like so. There is a direction to my fabric, so I'm going to place it face down in the right position, Then I'm going to fold it back and crease where the crease line on the fabric is underneath, because this is going to be stitched down like so, so that when it folds back it's up the right way, and you can see that the stem of whatever that plant is up the right way. So the crease line that I've made, I put on top of this crease line here, and then I'm just going to tape it in place. You're now going to pop your hoop back into your machine and stitch round number 7, and that's going to secure these two fabrics in place. I'm now going to remove the excess fabric this side of this stitch line, just to reduce the bulk. I'm now going to flip this one back and hold it in place with a little bit of tape. I'm also going to put a little bit of tape where these two fabrics overlap. Then you can pop your hoop back into your machine and stitch round number 8, and that's going to secure the rest of this fabric in place. Now going to place fabric number 6 face down with the raw edge here over this side of this stitch line. And again, check that when you flip the fabric over that it's going to cover your outer lines. Then tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 9, and that's going to secure it along here. Trim up the excess along here, and then flip your fabric back. I didn't do a very good job of that, did I? Flip your fabric back and tape it in place. And once more, I'm going to put a little bit of tape here and a little bit here. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 10, and that's going to secure the rest of this fabric. You're now going to trim up the excess fabric from along this stitch line here. We're now going to stitch round number 11, and that's going to zigzag along this line here. Next is round number 12, and that's going to quilt this area here. If you want to change your thread, now is the time to do so. I'm going to stay with my neutral colour for these. Next is colour 13, and that's going to quilt this area here. Next is a fan stitching along here. Next is round number 15, and that's going to do the flowers along here. So I've changed my thread to gold for that. I've changed my thread back to my neutral colour. You might want to change yours to whatever colour you want for the quilting in this area here. And then you're going to stitch round number 17. Next is the quilting over this area here. So if you want to change your thread, now is the time to do so. And then you're going to stitch round number 18. Next you're going to stitch round number 19, and that's going to do the quilting in this area here. So again, if you want to change your thread colour, now is the time to do so. The next series of stitching to be done is all the joins. I'm doing all mine in gold, so I won't be changing thread colour between each one. You can if you wish to. So we'll start with the first one, which is colour number 20, and that's going to do this one here. The next one is colour number 21, and that's going to do this one along here. Next is colour 22, and that's going to stitch over the join behind here. And the last one to be covered is the central one along here, and that's colour number 23. You're now going to free your work from the hoop. And you can now trim up around the edge of your bag, and you want to remember to leave your 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to do mine from the back, and I've already drawn on my seam allowance, and I'm just going to follow that line, and I just put the line on exactly the same as I did on the front. And that's your first bag panel completed. If you're doing this size in single hooping, you're now going to stitch another one, and that will give you your back and your front. So that's the piece that I did in 2 hoopings, and this is the one that was done in a single hooping, and as you can see, they're exactly the same size and they look identical. I'm going to put a pocket on the inside lining of my bag. So what I've done is I've taken the lining piece and one of my panels, and I've drawn around it because that's where my panel's going to sit in relation to my lining. Then, whoops. I now know where I can position my pocket. I've cut out a piece of fabric and I've just rolled the edge. I'll take the pins out and show you. And I've just folded it over and folded it over again, like so. Okay, and I've pressed it. So that gives me these lines to work to. Then I've cut diagonally across this corner here and then just folded it all back up, and I'm just going to tuck this corner over so that it gives me a mitered corner, like so, and that way when I stitch round I'm not going to have any bits of fabric poking out the side. Now I'm going to pin it from the front, and I put my pins in so that when I stitch, I will be stitching down here. It holds my fabric and I can just stitch straight over my pins. If you put them in the other way, you can't do it, but if you're careful and you put them in this way round, you can. So I've done that to both sides, and let's tuck that back in. I'm not too bothered about how neat the mitered corner is underneath because it's not going to be seen. All I want to do is make sure that it's going to sit flat when I position it onto my lining, bag lining. So once I've also stitched the top hem here, because that's going to be it's not going to be caught when I do round the edges. So that one I've done in advance. So now all I've got to do is position it where I want it in relation to the lining, and then I'm going to use these pins to hold it all in place. I'm afraid I'm all fingers and thumbs today. I think we all get days like that though, don't we? Okay. So that's that side. Just going to turn this round and now do the other side. So before I can add this to my panel, I'm going to be stitching these three sides. Another little bit of preparation I'm going to do is on the back panel is I'm going to need to add my cord, my shoulder strap if you like. So I've pinned that in place, and that goes on the front side with the tails in the air, and I've just put a couple of pins. You're also going to add your little flap, closer flap. That goes face down, and you want it in the middle of your bag, like so. And then you're going to pin that in place, and I've lost my pins, here they are. I'm just going to put a couple of pins in there. After I've stitched the pocket on my lining, what I'm going to do is take this, and I'm going to place this face down, lining up with the line that I've drawn, and then I'm going to pin this, and after I've pinned it, I'm going to be stitching along this line here, and that's going to hold everything in place that we need to for now. So I'm going to put this aside. Then for the front panel, I've got my lining fabric, and I'm going to place that face down, and I'm going to pin that onto there, and I will be stitching along this line here to join the lining to the front. So I'm going to pin this, and I'm going to put my pins up so that if I want to stitch over them I can, and obviously you slow down when you go over them, but it does make things much quicker. Okay, So I'm going to put that aside a minute. I'm going to get my machine up and then start sewing. I'm now going to stitch the top edge of my front panel, and I've got the right sides together, and we're just going to follow this line all the way along. And I'm not going to stitch actually on the line, I'm going to stitch a hair's width to the left of this line so that this stitch line will actually be hidden. It'll be much neater. And I'm now going to do the same with the back panel. Okay, so there's my two panels. There's the back and that one is the front, and I've removed the pins and I've pressed them so that this seam here falls away. That's so that when we go to sew it together, everything lays nice and flat. On this one, I'm going to tuck my cord in my little pocket so that it holds it out of the way until such times as it's all finished. So I'm just going to pop that in there, and it won't get into mischief while we're sewing all the way around the edges. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over. Now, on here you've got a guideline that you're going to be stitching to, but on this side you haven't. So what I've done is I folded that over so that where the two fabrics meet, it's folded on that line, and then I used a chalk pen to draw around the outer edge. Then I opened it up and I took my little piece of card that we used earlier and I just went round and drew inside so that this line is more or less the same as this line. I've done the same on the front, and I'm going to trim this piece up now because that's a bit too long, so I'm just going to quickly chop that along, leaving about 1/2 inch, of course. Okay. So next I'm going to have my back with the right side up, and I'm going to place my front right side down with the two panels on top of each other and the two linings on top of each other. And I drew these on both because I wasn't sure which side I was going to be stitching from when I picked it up. But I'm going to try and make sure that the back is down so that everything stays in the pocket. Okay, so now we need to line these pieces up and pin them. I'm just going to turn this round. So seam to seam. I'm just going to go ahead and pin around I will be checking to make sure that it's all aligned before I stitch it, because I can't see very well from here. I'm not too bothered about my lining because that's going to be hidden inside the bag, so it doesn't really matter if I stray off the lines there, but I do want to make sure that my seams on the panels do line up properly. And now I'm going to do the same for the lining. And it's going to be this inside line that's going to be our stitch line. Now, we do need to leave a gap so that we can turn everything, and I'm going to leave mine at the bottom here so that I find it easier than actually putting it on the side. So I'm going to move my pins over, and where I need to stop I'm going to double pin, and you want about 4 inches to be able to turn it comfortably. And if you want that in metric, that's 100 millimeters. So all this will be coming through this gap here. Okay, so next I'm going to set up my machine, and we're going to be sewing from here all the way around, and we're going to be stopping there. Okay, so let's sew. And I'm going to sew just inside this stitch line as I did with the top. I'm now going to trim up around the outside edge here. We're now going to clip the corners so that when we turn this, they all sit nice and neatly, and we're going to do it both sides. Be careful not to cut the stitching though. We can now turn it out the right way. What remains to do here is to sew that up, and I'm going to hand stitch that. I'll just do over stitch because it's going to be invisible anyway because it's going inside the bag. So I've stitched the end up, and I've given the edges a press as well so that they all lie nice and neat. And all we need to do now is push the lining inside the bag. And there's my little pocket there to put my bank cards in. I will give this another press around the edge so that it sits nice and neatly as it should. Okay. Now all I'm going to do is stitch my rows onto there, and then that's my bag finished. I've stitched my rows on. I know it's very difficult to see because it's quite dark, but my cord just wraps around the rows and that keeps my bag nice and firmly closed. I hope you enjoyed this stitch along. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to be notified of new videos as they're published. Do pop along to Creative Kiwi's Facebook group. There's lots of ideas, help and inspiration there for everybody. And thank you very much for joining me.